Hello and welcome to the Pluso Presents podcast for the week of October 7th, 2024. My name is Mike Peluso. I am your host. This is episode number 255, and the title of this week's episode and the title of our post of the week is 80 Years. So what's so special about 80 years? That's actually the whole point about this. It's a cycle that you see in major movements throughout society. You see it economically, you see it politically, and what makes it so special is that's about the average age of a lifespan. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because you make decisions based upon your life experiences. And as you, and I say you, I mean all of us. And if you haven't experienced something, then you can't really have an opinion about that. So we are currently at the crux of an 80-year cycle as it relates to politics. And for the most part, most of the people who remember the last time the world was kind of like this, they're all dead because they were the greatest generation. They were the ones who fought World War II. When all of a sudden there was a country in Europe that decided it wanted to go to war over more dirt. And that sounds a little familiar with today's headlines. And the world got involved in massive wars. And that's kind of where we're at now, if you look at it from a certain perspective. There's also the economic 80-year cycle. And that's where we make the same financial mistakes every 80 years or so because, again, everybody's dead. So you see overinvestment, and that tends to lead to a big depression of some sort of worldwide depression. So that's what today's article is about. It's pretty simple. Here's the concept. This is where the concept comes from. And this is how it's probably going to affect the world. And then I ask the question and we explore the answer. How are you going to survive that so the chaos of the world does not affect you? And I've got some ideas on that. And you can hear those ideas, and they're pretty good ones. You can hear those ideas in our post of the week.
Post of the week.
80 years. In an article by a local Politico, they posited a theory about major political upheavals every 80 years that resulted in significant violence. The theory is that every 80 years or so, people are so distanced ideologically, they can't comprehend the other side. It started with England and the colonies, who thought of themselves as states. 80 years later, it was slavery and the Civil War. 80 years after that, isolationists versus New Deal era interventionists, which led to World War II. Their theory is that we are right about that 80-year point, and the cycle has manifested in our cultural war, a war which they predict will end in violence if it follows the normal trend. If you've spent any time in my little town of Pittsburgh and watched the protests over the Civil War statue in the last election cycle, you could see where this local Politico is coming from. More importantly, his article reminded me of another 80-year cycle theory. The theory is one of economic turmoil. More than likely, the two are intertwined. That got me thinking. If we are aware of it, can we avoid letting it impact our lives? In the 80-year cycle of economic prosperity, officially known as the Kondratiev wave or Kondratiev cycle, because it was originally proposed by Russian economist Nikolai Kondratiev in the 1920s, the official theory breaks down the different periods into 4 seasons. To distill the highly complex theory to its most basic element, economic upheaval happens about every 80 years because everyone who was alive during the last one is now dead. The current generation makes the same mistakes and goes through a cycle that reflects generations past. Usually this is caused by what my grandma would say is putting good money after bad. An economist would say it's a massive overinvestment into securities where the perceived value is far, far above the actual value. Eventually, a major crash happens. This is simple and makes sense, even if the actual underpinning theory is significantly more complex. If you have no emotional connection to the past, then what you are doing seems new and different, even if it's really the same as what happened before. Remember the phrase new economy right before the dot-com bust? I do. Unfortunately, most of the population isn't a history theorist. They know what they have experienced and have been enculturated to by their family. A good example of family enculturation existed when I was a child. We were encouraged to go to school and get a good job, because college at the time was fairly inexpensive and resulted in highly paid jobs with minimal dangerous physical labor attached to it. Over the years, that changed. Companies who were loyal to employees in the 1950s and 1960s changed their philosophy of operating by minimizing the value and related investment into the humans they employed. Colleges got more expensive through feature creep and bureaucracy bloat. Easy student loans meant a generation grew up with advanced degrees, lots of debt, and an unreliable employer environment leading to limited availability to pay for their education or even maintain a minimal quality of life. These generational cycles are all big trends that can be avoided if you are able to see them. When I say avoided, you can't avoid a macro environment. You can minimize the macro environment's impacts on your life. In my case, I would like to choose to not have anything to do with the cycle. It's easier said than done, like most things in life, at least economically. How do you survive in an economic downturn where there are no jobs available? I went through that in the Great Recession with nearly 2 years without a job in my field. The eventual job I got was with a boiler room operation masquerading as a real tech company. It's definitely easier to deal with emotionally if you see it as a cycle. The militant conservatives of the 2020s don't have an emotional or practical connection to the militant conservatives of the 1930s or the 1860s. If they did, they would accept that the world is changing. They would understand on an emotional level that the benefit of going to war over cultural values isn't worth the price, especially if you are absolutely going to lose. I only say that because the argument of let's go back to the way things were always loses. We don't have slaves, we aren't isolationists, and I predict a European-style nanny state is inevitable in another generation or two. I've come to terms with that. These are social and social-political trends. Even though I'm more interested in the 80-year economic cycle, or more specifically, how the macroeconomics affect micro-lifestyles, I know the two are intertwined. This makes complete sense as how we manage our money equates to how we express our values. If we follow the political and economic theory, we know that there's going to be a major economic upheaval soon. It may even include significant and impactful violence. Then how do you keep this from destroying your life? I've developed some survival tactics. Regarding pressing issues of the day, don't have an opinion, at least not a strong outward opinion. If you have an opinion, you become a member of a tribe. That alienates you from everyone who's not in the tribe. It also keeps you from thinking clearly about the trends. Of course, this puts you in the minority. In times of upheaval, most people are taking sides. It's a skill that has to be developed, but you can try to be neutral in a way where most people think you agree with them. In the end, having a strong opinion isn't a good thing, at least not for your quality of life. Accepting you can't change society will help you come to peace with things you may not like. Abortion legal and you don't like it? Teach your kids why you don't think it should be allowed, but don't tell them to go out and protest at abortion clinics. That does nothing to actually change the world. It may even get them killed. Also, keep in mind, their generation is different from yours. Don't disown your kids because the world they grew up in sees abortion as an accepted right that they agree with. What about the other side of the aisle? Do you support trans advocacy to the extreme? For example, do you want insurance to pay for gender realignment surgery? Except that there will always be a large portion of the population who will be militant in protecting traditional gender roles. Another survival tactic is to protect yourself economically. This means conservative and diversified investments and limited debt. If you don't have monthly bills, it's easier to surf the months where there is limited income. The conservatively diversified investments means your losses in times of upheaval will be minimal. There will still be losses, but they will be something you can overcome. The limited debt piece is really hard, but the most powerful. If you have no mortgage, no car payment, no student loans, no medical debt, and most importantly, no credit card debt, then you only have to deal with utilities and taxes. If you find yourself in a situation where you have to work 3 part-time jobs because the economy is in the toilet, then you can still survive. It's like financially treading water until the world gets over its issues and starts to work again. Yes, there is always bankruptcy, but that doesn't help keep your quality of life stable. But what about everyone who doesn't see it? These are broad trends, and only someone who's got an analytical mind and an interest in history will be drawn to them. That's a very small subset of our population. Historical, socio-political, economic cycles simply don't come up as a topic of conversation at community gatherings. If you bring them up, you will be quickly shut down, or emotionally reactive commentary will take over the conversation. This is because the majority of the world will rely on their life experiences to develop opinions and make decisions. Honestly, there isn't a solution here. This ignorant majority is the reason why these cycles exist. I'd say ignore these people and eject them from your circle, but that's not an option if you want to have any sort of social life. We have to accept and interact with the good things people bring to our lives, even if it means dealing with the bad. That's why I go back to the first rule of not having an opinion. There's more to be said about the other facets of the cycles, i.e., if you were entering the workforce during the last spring cycle, right when broad adoption of computing was changing the face of business, then it's pretty clear where you needed to go and what you needed to do. If you got involved in that industry at that time, jumped around to different companies that were growing, and took some risks, you'd have a great career behind you and a very fat retirement account. Unfortunately, it's pretty clear we aren't in that season of the cycle. The world is bifurcated and very conflicted, and the trends don't look good. That's why I chose to focus on survival tactics for uncertain times economically and socially. Understanding the concept of an 80-year cycle is easy. Understanding it on an emotional level and reacting appropriately based on where your birth lottery puts you in that cycle is much harder. Still, if you can see it, then there is real power in making big life and career moves based on the cycle. You can zag when everyone else is zigging. My final thought is that it's a real shame they don't teach this theory in high school history class. I think my life could have been much different had I understood this cycle 30 years ago. At least I can teach it to my kids. It won't change the world cycle, but maybe it will change the arc of their lives as they navigate their own cycles. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Peluso Presents podcast. You can follow the Peluso Presents efforts via Twitter @PelusoPresents, on Facebook, on Medium.com, just search for Mike Peluso, on LinkedIn, and of course on the blog located at www.pelusopresents.com. You can email us directly via peluso@outlook.com. This podcast is available on all major podcast services, including iTunes, Google Play Music, or your podcast service of choice. We love and appreciate any comments and reviews you wish to leave. Please remember to support this effort by sharing and liking the postings on all your social media. If you'd like to support this effort more directly, you can via patreon.com/Peluso Presents. Thank you for listening, following, sharing, and for your support. We appreciate it.